talk a little bit about Durkheim, who was obviously one of the more important progenitors and originators of sociology, living from 1858 to 1918, obviously slightly later than the other ones. The other two we talked about until now, Kant and Marx. Now, his focus was on the division of labor and what he called solidarity. In other words, all the divisions of labor would form one solid whole. This became very complex in the after the Industrial Revolution. Prior to that, it was relatively simple. Like I said before, there was cottage industries. Manufacture was done in the home. It became more complex when you actually had a factory. And then, when you think about it, even the most simplest of ideas in the factory, when we talked about the cotton gin or the mechanized spinning wheel, you were dependent on another factory to produce the mechanization. So things became extremely complex. Now, actually, what Durkheim was famous for was his study of suicide. He thought it was didn't make sense to talk about the individual immediate circumstances that lead people to kill themselves, because there was too many of them. It was impossible to understand millions and millions of every single person, what was his particular motivation. But of course, that was fine because he was a psychologist. Sometimes somebody would kill themselves after they become wealthy, or sometimes after they become poor, or feeling the marriage is trapped, or who knows what. All sorts of possibilities. Now, what does that have to do with the differences in the way of production, the different differences in production and jobs that make up a whole? Well, he said that there are relationships that people have to society. There are different relationships that people can have, and it's very complex. And the relationships that they have will affect the solidarity of the society itself. And why was suicide a way of understanding that? Because suicide, by definition, is the severing of a relationship with society. Everybody, suicide happens across the board. It doesn't make a difference, with age, with sex, with religion. It might be more prevalent in the geriatric population as against the middle age. Actually, the geriatric is the highest level. But we have to try to understand what are the societal factors which define a person's relationship with society, and because of that, he or she will want to sever their relationship with the society. Now, he named a couple of possible reasons or relationships to society. The first one we call the egoistic, which is a state in which the ties attaching the individual others of the society are weak. It's based on his own feeling and not feeling to somebody else. It did not connect. For instance, a chronically ill person, he might feel that he's pushed off from his friends and his family and other acquaintances because they don't want to upset the patient or upset themselves, so he turns into himself. The opposite of that would be the altruistic, where a person has very, very strong ties, very strong ties to the group, and there's no life beyond the group. So a person can't feel himself separate. Why would a person like that sever his relationship with society? Well, it might be that he's a soldier, or it might be he's a suicide terrorist. They're doing it because they love society, not because they're only interested in themselves. So obviously that would be a soldier. The third type was the anomic, right? Which, in this case, the person's ties to society are cut off, but not by a only feeling about himself, but because there's a sudden, absolute shift in his relationship that becomes too upsetting. In other words, a great change in economics, a great change that his status became changed, his master status, different type of statuses, which we'll talk about, changed dramatically, so he didn't know how to deal with it, and it changes their whole structure of relationship to society. So in some people, then we'll find they have a need to, well, actually, he's found through the data. Don't forget that we're talking about something which wants to become a field of study that wants to become scientific. So through the data, he found there are people like this who, after a change in their status, a sudden change in status, became distraught enough to commit suicide. And the fourth situation was the fatalistic, where the situation becomes so oppressive, so overwhelming, that the person feels no possible chance of release. Futures are completely blocked. There's no way of getting out of it. So, I mean, he would say, do not the suicides of slaves, said to be frequent under certain circumstances, belong to this type, that people, a slave would commit suicide. So these described their types of relationships with society.